Hello, I'm United States Senator Mark Warner from the state of Virginia. To all those who are watching this interview in the United States, I say good morning. And for those of you who may be watching this interview from India, I say good evening. This is an extraordinarily important week for United States-Indian relations as we welcome Prime Minister Modi to Washington later this week. I'm looking forward to my opportunities to both visit with Prime Minister Modi in a variety of meetings, hear his presentation to the United States Congress, and attend the state dinner in honor of Prime Minister Modi. I think we all know that since India's independence, its relationships with the United States have gone through a variety of phases. We are now at a critical juncture of this relationship, where we need to move beyond the kind of common descriptions of this ties between the world's oldest democracy, the United States, and the world's greatest and biggest democracy, India, and turn that into a full-fledged partnership. My ties to India go back to a very strong Indian-American community in Virginia. And my first trip to India was about 20 years ago when I went as governor of the Commonwealth and saw the enormous potential that India offered. It's why I was so happy when I came to the United States Senate that after being here for a short period of time, I became the co-chair of the U.S. India Caucus in the United States Senate. With 42 members, it is the largest single country caucus in the whole Senate and shows the broad bipartisan support the India-U.S. relationship enjoys. Again, I'm looking forward to visiting and hearing from the Prime Minister. And the following is what I hope that we can discuss with our Indian colleagues. First, Senator Cornyn and I, my co-chair of the India Caucus, will be introducing this week, both as a standalone bill and as an amendment to the Defense Authorization Act, an effort to upgrade India-U.S. defense ties. What we propose is adding India to the so-called NATO +5 arrangement, where the United States is able to transfer with as little bureaucratic interference as possible defense equipment in a very strong way. This current relationship is only between the United States and NATO and certain other key allies like South Korea, Australia, New Zealand. Adding India to that category would strengthen our incredibly important defense ties, particularly as we both grapple with challenges in particular around China. Second, I'm looking to see the expansion of some of the conversations that have been started earlier called ICIT, around communications and technology. My background is in those fields, and I am looking forward very much to conversations about how India and the United States can partner in the next generation wireless technology beyond 5G called Open Radio Access Network. There's a real opportunity here for India to bring its enormous powers and expertise and software, combined with American efforts in telecommunications, to combine to where we move beyond traditional stacked hardware in telecommunications units. O-RAN is a great possibility for India and the United States, and I hope we'll be able to make some announcements on that subject. Third, as chairman of the Intelligence Committee, I understand both the challenges and some of the opportunities as we deal with a rising China. I was glad to see Secretary Blinken have a good visit in China, but I think as well, India realizes, and I realize, and I think in the United States, that China is a potential economic challenge and, in terms of aggressiveness in South Asia, a potential challenger on a variety of fronts. And that's why the United States and India must find more common cause. The Quad is a great step forward in that area. Adding India on defense alignment to the NATO +5 would be the next step. And finally, as someone on my most recent trip to India in February, where I joined with 9 other United States senators. I know in that visit, I saw an India whose time has arrived. And so many in my previous visits and meetings with Indian business leaders and governmental leaders, some folks have talked about India being an aspirational nation. I believe India's time has arrived. My visit in February, I'd never seen in India from both government officials, business leaders, and from the Indians on the street. Even when I visited a sanitation project in Mumbai and some of the poorest regions, there was enormous amount of confidence in India. India's time has arrived as a great nation, as truly one of the greatest nations in the world, and taking that important leadership position across a series of fronts will be, again, something else I believe we will hear from Prime Minister Modi. So with that, why don't I turn it over to Val, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
Senator, the first question will be from Saurav.
Val, we're not hearing you.
Times Now. Senator, can you hear me now?
No, we're not hearing you.
Okay.
We're still not hearing you.
Senator, can you hear me now? Okay, the first question will be from Saurav from the Times Network. Saurav? Okay, we'll go to Sunita with Ethnic Media Services.
Warner, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Go ahead, Sunita. Sunita, I believe you are muted.
Okay, Senator Warner, in its annual report on human rights abuses, the State Department has pointed out a number of challenges that India has had in this regard. Do you intend to question Prime Minister Modi on his administration's record of human rights violations? That's question number one. Question number two, India and the U.S. have had a trade war since the Trump administration, and I wonder if your meeting with Prime Minister Modi might attempt to reconcile that as well.
Well, let me try to take them in reverse order. You know, I strongly favor increased trade with India. This is a critical relationship between the United States and India. Unfortunately, we're still only about $100 billion in trade. I'd love to see those try to have us hit a goal of $500 billion of trade between our countries. Matter of fact, I met with AmCham, the American Chamber of Commerce from India, just last week on how we can deal with some of these trade constraints. And they go both ways. There are both concerns from the American side, and there are concerns from the Indian side. And I think that will be obviously a topic of conversation. In terms of the human rights challenges, I know that particularly individuals from the State Department, as they meet with their Indian counterparts this week, I'm sure will raise that issue. I think India is one of the most powerful nations in the world. I hope that we will hear from Prime Minister Modi a reaffirmation of his commitment to democracy and all that entails. I think at the same time, we see even in the United States, those forces who have, in the horrific events that took place in January 6th of 2021, even forces in the United States who sometimes question our democratic principles. So I think together, these two great nations both need to make sure we are totally committed to democracy and human rights, freedom of belief and freedom of expression. That makes great nations.
Okay, the next question will be from Times Now.
Senator, thank you for speaking to Times Now. My question to you, sir, is that soon after the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, Joe Biden, the President of the United States, had described India's position on the matter as shaky. Given how the ties have evolved between the two countries since then, do you see this as a possible roadblock going forward? Is that one challenge that the countries need to overcome?
Well, we all understand India's long-term ties to Russia. We also understand the fact that back with the India-Pakistan war in the 70s, Russia came to more aid of India, and the United States sided more with Pakistan. Now, obviously, much has changed since then. And were a number of us disappointed when India abstained on a series or voted against, in some cases, some of the UN resolutions? Yes. But in my last visit to India and in ongoing private conversations, the more we can advance our defense ties, the more India can rely upon the United States as a stable, consistent defense partner. I think that will allow India more freedom to move away from Russia. I also believe that this is an issue that in many ways is generational. I think the vast majority of younger Indians understand that their long-term own self-interest lie with a closer partnership with the United States and not a closer partnership with China or Russia. So this is an area where I hope we will see movement, but I think the long-term trends move in the right direction.
Okay, the next question will be from Yashwant from the Indo-Asian News Service.
Hi, Senator. Thank you so much for doing this call. You mentioned in your remarks that you plan to introduce legislation to upgrade ties with India by expanding NATO Plus and including India in NATO, expanded NATO Plus grouping. But I'm sure you're aware India is not very keen, and the Foreign Minister, External Affairs suggestion only last week said,
is now joining.
And I quote him, this is not a template that applies to India, and he clearly is not in favor. So how do you were very keen to give India the status of NATO Plus, including NATO Plus, but India doesn't want to go there. What happens now?
I guess what I would say is we are hearing, and this is not the first time, first of all, I should say, that we have tried to upgrade the ties on the defense basis between India and the United States. And this exchange on a defense basis really has improved a bit during Obama, a bit more during Trump, and really I think now can come to full fruition under President Biden, number one. Number two, there are large numbers of both Indian defense companies, Indian American companies that do defense, and we did hear from a number of Indian officials during my February visit of a need for increased defense ties. So I think our chances of being successful this year get a little better in light of the Prime Minister's visit. And I do think stronger defense ties between our two nations is in the best interest of India long term, particularly as it's been pointed out that there are actually more Chinese troops on the China-India border than there are Russian troops invading in Ukraine. So I heard that repeatedly during our visit in February, and one of the strongest ways we can strengthen India's defense capabilities is by increased trade in the defense realm.
Senator, the next question is from Prashant at the Hindujan Times. Prashant, I know you're on the call. If you are muted, you can. Oh, there you go.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is this good?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Warner, one of the big deliverables during this visit appears to be a key jet engine deal where General Electric will sign a memorandum of understanding with an Indian defense public sector undertaking to manufacture GE F414 jet engines. This will require a notification to the Congress, and I believe that process has begun, and it will go to the full House. Would you like to say something about congressional approval for this deal, and what your position on the jet engine co-production deal is?
Well, I am not aware of the particulars of this GE deal, but I have been generally supportive of these India-U.S. defense deals. I think it's an area where there should be greater cooperation. It's again why Senator Cornyn, my co-chair of the India Caucus, and I will both be introducing standalone legislation and an amendment to the Defense Authorization Bill, which the Senate will take up after our July 4th recess, where we could have this increased ties. It's called the NATO plus kind of arrangement, and it would diminish the amount of sign-offs that would take place on these kind of deals. So let me get the particulars, but I've been generally supportive of these stronger business ties in the defense field. I think it's an area that's in the long-term best interest of India, and it's also the longer-term best interest of the United States, as we need India to have a strong, vibrant defense to stand up for its own interest in South Asia, and as also be willing to push back against some of the adventurism of China in the region.
Senator, the next question is from Rohit at Baksar.
Thank you, Senator, for taking this and doing this for us. There's a lot of focus on, the people-to-people relationship between the India and the United States. But there's one area where a lot of Indians who live in America have a concern, which is with their green card backlog, with the lines of green card, which take up to 120 plus years. I was wondering if that possibly could be addressed in some way. Not obviously you need a legislation to pass that, but is that something that the Indian side would probably want to discuss, or you probably want to talk about it, especially when the Prime Minister is visiting the U.S.?
I believe so. This is not a problem that's new. Matter of fact, years ago, I was part of a group to try to raise the country cap so that India did not have the same kind of constraints, because we have way more Indians applying for visas at a much higher level than certain other nations, and to kind of spread those out on simply a per capita basis didn't make sense to me. We heard about this issue again constantly in February when I visited India, and I heard about it from business leaders, from governmental leaders, and I think it is holding back some of our ties. One of the strengths of this people-to-people relationship is the 4 million plus Indian Americans who call the United States now home. Some of those Indians are people who are here on visas. In particular, we've seen the challenge, people who are here on, I believe, H-1B visas, and sometimes their kids age out. The challenge around the visa program, particularly coming out of COVID, is that the United States is way behind. We're way behind not only on issuing visas to Indians, but I know we are way behind simply on issuing Americans passports. So this question of catching up from where we fell behind during COVID, and from the fact that there are some members of the American Congress who are very much against, it appears, rational immigration reform, makes this a challenge. But I do know this will be an issue that will be raised, and I will be one that will be advocating for a faster visa process.
Thank you, sir.
Senator, the next question is from Siddhant at WION. Okay, while we wait to see if Siddhant can unmute, we will go to Aziz with India TV.
Rohit Sharma
is now exiting.
Go ahead. Okay, Senator, we're going to go to the 703 number on the line. If you raised your hand and you have a 703 number, this is your turn to ask a question. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. So I am going to throw it open for questions. If you have not emailed me and you would like to ask a question, now you can go ahead.
Let me go ahead and then just make a couple of closing comments. This is going to be very exciting. This is the first state visit that Prime Minister Modi has made. He's been to the United States a number of times, we all know, but this is going to get the full pomp and circumstances of a state visit. I think this relationship between India and the United States is absolutely one of the most critical for both nations. And part of this is also in terms of what I call the new definition of national security. In many ways in 2023, for both India and the United States, national security is much more than tanks and guns and ships and planes. And in many ways, it is a competition around various technology domains. It's one of the reasons why we in the United States recently did a $52 billion bill to try to bring part of the semiconductor industry back to the United States and with our allies. It's why India has moved forward with an over $10 billion semiconductor investment itself. It's why I think whether we're talking about synthetic biology, where India is doing a lot of bioproduction, and we are trying to grow that as well in America, there's also opportunities for collaboration. I've already talked about wireless communications. I also believe artificial intelligence, quantum computing. There are so many areas where, particularly vis-a-vis a competition with China, that I think the United States and India can find common ground. One of the areas that India has done so remarkable is in technology development. I sometimes marvel at the Indian system potentially, or the Indian system in terms of being able to transfer funds from the government literally down into the smallest village in India in a way that candidly the United States and other nations can learn from India. So this technology cooperation is something that I'm going to particularly focus on, but it's going to be a very exciting week. I'm looking forward to our meetings with the Prime Minister, looking forward to his address to the United States Congress. I'm looking forward as well to what I think is going to be an extraordinary Thursday night with a state dinner. And for all of you on the line, I hope we'll get a chance to visit again and again. To my colleagues in the United States, good morning, and to my colleagues in India, good evening.